Hey there, it's Brooke, and welcome to Finding Hope on the Spectrum, where I have heart-to-heart conversations with parents, professionals, and autistic individuals sharing personal insight and life experiences. Together, we dive deep into supports, programs, and stories that offer inspiration, insight, and most importantly, hope for the neurodiverse community. Before we begin with today's topic, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you know someone who this would be helpful for, please pass it along. Remember to always stay curious, be kind, and have an open heart. All right, welcome back to Finding Hope on the Spectrum. Today, we're talking about a stage of life that doesn't get enough attention in the autism community, and that is teens and adults. So much focus these days is placed on early intervention and independence in that arena with younger children. And today we're going to be talking with Stephen Roberts, who's an RDI consultant at Therapeutic Approach to Growth. And Stephen specializes in supporting neurodivergent teens and adults. And his work focuses on helping individuals build agency, real-world competence, and the confidence to navigate life with greater independence. And he is just phenomenal at what he does. I have worked with Stephen for many years, and I'm just so excited to have him on today and have him share just this wealth of knowledge that he has with our audience. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke, for that introduction. Very excited to be here. And yeah, just to share a little bit about my experience supporting adults and older teens on the spectrum.
Awesome. Well, I know we chatted and I'm just so excited to have this conversation. I think that your work really focuses so much on teens and adults. And I know that's you're so passionate about it. And I'd love for you to start off with just sharing kind of what pulled you towards supporting this stage of life and why it matters so much to you.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it just kind of fell into place during COVID. I knew I wanted to work in the neurodiverse field, but I really didn't know what capacity. And so basically just as I started working with TAG, I felt like I was really able to connect and support them and fill an unmet need here in California, which I also imagine exists across the United States and globally. Expanding on that a little bit, just being in my early 30s and a male, I've been able to connect with young men and use my life experiences to help guide them, which is just so cool. I mean, a really great reason to get up and be excited on a Monday. Well, I do work with both men and women. I do I will say I focus mostly, my niche is kind of with young men, just because we work in a field that's predominantly women. So it's cool. I get to play this awesome role of hopefully I'm a cool guy to them who can relate in different ways due to just sharing similar life experiences.
Absolutely. And I think that's so true. So many professionals in our field are women, and I think it is so significant for teens and adult men to have the opportunity to be mentored by somebody that, is a male and that is somebody they can relate to and can have that connection. And I know one of the big things that you talk a lot about and you focus on in your work is engagement and really building a meaningful relationship with your clients. And I think that's what sets you apart in so many ways, just that you really are good at building those meaningful, trusting relationships. And I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about how you do that and why that is so important.
Yeah, well, I think just going back a little bit before touching on that, kind of the unmet need of working with adults is some can just fall through the gaps, depending on if they're in an ATP program or going to college, or maybe in this in-between stage or just attending a day program. They need some additional opportunities just to improve their quality, develop their skills, develop their competencies. So I love becoming this peer mentor and friend who can just kind of help fill that need. And even with one client that I work with, or I did as a life coach, it's all about community integration and taking him to the gym, helping him order food, just having experiences out in the community, just so he could build that confidence, participating in the community that just really enriched the quality of life that he had. And now touching on that question that you had about building those meaningful connections, I just really believe in my heart that connections are just so important in our lives. If you look at blue zones across the world, a lot of it's based on tight-knit communities. And so I really just believe in the power of relationships. So building meaningful relationships is so important for both parents and professionals, because it's For me, it's like the foundation of promoting meaningful change. When I
Mhm.
work with like a new client or like a new adult, new teen, I spend about like the first, I would say like month or two, really just focusing on that relationship that I'm building with them. And I'll
Mhm.
even be like upfront with parents too, saying like, this is like what we need to work on building so the child can, or the individual can feel trust, safety, and connection with me or with another professional before diving into goals to work on. So like for
Mhm.
any parents who might be listening or just like any professionals, I think it's really important to kind of have like a similar mindset to focus on the process, not just the product. It's so easy to walk into a
Mhm.
case and you just want to immediately start working on different areas. But if that foundational like relationship isn't in place, uh, it's going
Mhm.
to be like a longer road to work on those skills. And I can elaborate on that a little bit.
Mhm.
For us, like a basic human need is feeling like safe. And so if we're not feeling safe, our brain's like in this fight or flight response. So learning is impeded and the guiding relationship I have with someone, like it's going to disintegrate. So to overcome that, you build that safety and you build that trust. And, once you're able to kind of gain that relationship, it allows me to, part of my role is to push somebody outside of their comfort zone. And to achieve that, like as time passes, I have to establish this connection with the client where they know that they can feel safe and they can trust me, but I'm also going to push them at the right level of challenge and always be there to support them. And it really just takes some time to develop kind of that relationship with an individual. But like once it's there, it can really expand what we're
Mhm.
able to work on, what we're able to achieve, and how the individual is able to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just shared so many important points. And what stands out to me is that meaningful relationship is the foundation. And once you have that strong relationship, it really does open the door for you to be able to challenge your clients. And I love that you also shared how you go into the community and create real authentic experiences with your clients. And I think
Mhm.
that goes so far. It makes it so it doesn't feel contrived and
Yeah.
feels like a real meaningful relationship. And
Yeah,
that's so powerful.
it's all about like being organic and real. And I think that's one thing that once you develop this relationship, it also creates that realness in that dynamic interaction that you're having with another person. It's not static, it's not clinical, it's very organic. And I'd love to touch a little bit just to like maybe helpful for to share like how I sometimes can like work on that relationship with a client, like how I kind of get in the
Mhm.
door a little bit.
Sure. That'd be great.
Yeah, because I just think it's like really important. I'd love just to maybe share some ideas that could benefit parents or any other listeners. I have this philosophy of meeting the person in their world and then trying to pull them slowly into mine. I think for anybody
Mhm.
who's worked with somebody on the spectrum, they've probably seen how they can get immersed into their special interest. And so oftentimes I want to try to meet them there. And
Mhm.
so when we can share like a similar like special interest, like let's say it's animals, it's a little bit easier because also share that as well. So I can get them talking about if they have any pets or what kind of animals they like. And then I can show them a video of my dog doing tricks. So it just kind of like opens up a really easy and natural like conversation where we can have like a little bit of back and forth, build that comfort, build that familiarity as we get to know one another. And then sometimes it could be like a little bit tougher if like the special interest is, let's say, like maybe like a video game that I'm not familiar with, but I still find it like fascinating to like explore someone's interest with them, like something that they're fascinated about, like I can get fascinated about just by like seeing how
Mhm.
immersed they get into the subject. And then I also just like try to find some middle ground too. Like let's say they're really into like playing the violin. Well, I can share like, oh, I've played the guitar for 10 years. That's really cool. I've never played the violin. I wonder how long you played it for. So just finding those little areas that you can create that connection with the person based on their interest and then also share mine.
Yeah. Well, I think, but for me, when you're describing that, even as you're describing it, it's your intention is so powerful. You have
Mhm.
this really strong intention to connect and to not come in with a set of an agenda besides just connecting.
Yeah.
And I think they feel that. And I think that goes so far, especially at all times, right? When we're working with our clients, but especially when you're initially building that relationship and they don't know you and they're not sure and they've had experiences of other professionals who may have come in with a more specific agenda or more demands. And so it takes
Yeah.
time to build that trust. And I think that just goes so far in building that trusting relationship. Even just the way you're describing it is so
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah, it really is very powerful. And it opens up so many doors. Some that, I've kind of shared about being able to push the individual outside their comfort zone, and just work on areas of growth. But it also kind of helps me whenever I work with someone. I'm trying to like to paint a full picture of who they are. And, by getting to know them and building that relationship, I start to figure out like, okay, what motivates this person? What interests them? So, I can use those interests and those strengths into my work. Like for
Mhm.
example, like when we were working on writing with a student I was working with at one point, I knew he was really into Pokemon, and so we wrote a movie script and filmed a movie based on Pokemon. And it was just so cool to
Mhm.
see like how engaged in the activity he was and his motivation. Where, prior to that, if we're working on like just a normal paper, it was like pulling teeth, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it was just really cool to create this new experience that was exciting and fun for both of us and
Yeah,
meaningful.
absolutely. It's so meaningful. Yeah. Yes. And I can imagine it goes a long way. And so let's talk about skill building. We hear a lot about skill building for young children, but much less about adulthood. What do teens and adults or need most to grow beyond therapy and supports, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And answering it's going to be so unique to just each person that I'm working with. I mean, it's not a
Mhm.
one size fits all for what I do and for the support that I give. But ultimately, what I try to reflect on when I work with somebody is two questions. What does the client need to be as independent as possible? And what do they need to have like the most meaningful life? So, yeah, that's going to look very different for each person. And it's going to be hard to like maybe generalize it for everybody listening. So it's really about like if they do have a son or daughter on the spectrum who's an adult or teen, or they're professionals, maybe starting with answering those two questions. So for some, it's going to be working on like core challenges like perspective taking and interpersonal competence, like peer relationships, just relationships in general. With others, it might be like more independent living skills. For others, I've already talked about just community integration and things like that. And so ultimately, I just find like at least like 80% of the adults I work with want to have friends, independence, hobbies, maybe vocational pursuits, and just a meaningful life is. So, key focus is going to be helping them with interpersonal relationships, friendships, having opportunities at the home and in the community. And yeah, so as I mentioned with one client, it was about going out into the community, ordering food, setting up peer matches, things of that nature, even just like going to the gym. For others, it was like a chance to pack his suitcase for upcoming trip. And it's all about just giving them the opportunities that they need that are going to be meaningful for them and then meaningful for just, again, their independence and their quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
Uh,
know we've talked about that the importance of agency too. And I know that's a big one for you. What do you see that looks like with these teens that you're working with, and how do you work on agency?
yeah. Well, I would define agency as like a person being able to do the things they want in life. So for me, it starts with helping a person identify their goals. Like, what is important? Is it having a job, friends, pursuing hobbies or interests out in the community, living independently? For us, it can be such an easy question that we've been able to answer, but often young adults on the spectrum either like have never asked themselves, what is it I would like to accomplish? And then more importantly, how do I accomplish it? Like, what are the steps that myself, parents, or others or professionals can guide me in? So for anyone listening who wants help with this, I there's this great document called ARC's. What is it? It's ARC self-determination scale. I use it almost with all, you can just Google that online and it should pop up. I think it's a PDF. I use it almost like with all my adults because the first two pages help them evaluate their skills in areas like peer relationships, independent living skills, hobbies, vocational skills, things like that. And so it can have the individual kind of rate their level of competencies in all these different categories. And I don't really use it so much as a rating system. I use it to promote self-awareness about like, okay, where are we at right now? Like if these are all the skills that provide a meaningful life, like where do we sit in all of them? And then furthermore, like as we're going through it or at the end, I have the person kind of start to evaluate, okay, if we picked out 3 of these categories, what would be the most important for you to start working on? And yeah, this is going to be like really powerful because let's say I'm working with Billy and the parent really wants Billy to start working on making his own lunch at home, like a very important independent living skill. But if we're able to do like the ARC self-determination scale or just even just reflect and think about what is it that Billy really wants to work on, he might start with, I want to learn to wash my own clothes. That might be meaningful and important to him. And so this could be like a really great like middle ground and starting point to start working on those independent living skills with something that this person's going to be motivated rather than just kind of imposing our will, where we're going to get like maybe some pushback, some resistance, and he's just maybe not going to be motivated to work on that skill. And what's great is I'm all about like a collaborative approach, whether it's with parent and child or like my own work with an individual. And so if we can kind of collaborate on that goal, I can help guide his thinking to being like, that's a great choice that we want to start working on the independent living skill of washing your clothes. I was thinking about for myself, and I know like for me, it's like really important to make my own lunches because we all have to eat. Like, I wonder if that would be something you'd be interested in learning. And hopefully that could guide his thinking and just like open up a discussion where this person's now hopefully going to buy in to the skill that we want to work on. Yeah. And I would say just one last like caveat is, what if he says like, no, I don't want to work on that? And so there might be times to set realistic expectations. I'm sure parents experience that a lot. And I want to just like address that. But you could also just acknowledge that experience and just still focus on that relationship, that connection. Because as long as that stays strong, hopefully you can help guide the person in the direction that you want to push them. And you can acknowledge like, okay, I can understand you're not ready or you don't want to start making your own food. But we both agreed that it'd be good to work on your independence. So maybe we could come back and revisit this in the future after you learn to take care of your own clothes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think it's validating and acknowledging, but also encouraging at the same time. And giving them a buy-in. And we know that the internal motivation is so powerful that when you have that, you're going to see a lot more growth and opportunity to go towards the challenge. I love that example that you gave.
Yeah, it's incredibly like you do, once you give them that agency, you do really just see them like start to get empowered, and you see them just like motivated to take on additional challenges and really just start pushing themselves. So it's like really cool when you see that change. And one additional area, just really quick to touch on, is for more, let's say, impacted individuals or like spellers, like nonverbal individuals. One of the first things I start working on with like because I also support like parents and teams as well, is so I'll start like saying, let's start giving them choices. And that might be like what to eat, what to wear, what's your dreams. Really start giving them those choices, starts to give them that agency where they now feel like they have control and say in their life. And it's really cool to just like, especially for like nonverbal individuals who are learning to spell or can make choices, it's really cool to see them just kind of get excited that they can now have this control and this agency in their life. Just really gives them a lot of meaning.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's such a good point because we know that sometimes parents will overcompensate and will make those choices for their children, their adult children. In this case, we'll speak about them as children, but they're adults, but they're always their child. The parents will say, they're always going to be my baby. And I appreciate that so much. They love their children so much. But, even just the simple act, like you said, of letting them choose their outfit, that happens so often, right? I mean, I see it all the time with our clients that they don't even realize that is something that they could be giving their child an opportunity to decide, and how meaningful it is. And it's just one little simple kind of symbol of how many things that are out there that are like that we can slowly over time give these families opportunities to have this awareness. So let's talk a little bit about that idea of overcompensation and what that looks like in your work with these teens and adults.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, just like the overcompensation or just compensating for a child or I say child, but I kind of mean that from like a parent's perspective. It's just something really big that I see and work on with families, because as you mentioned, there could be like well-intentioned compensations for a child, and it can be really hard to determine like what to compensate for and what not to. But what I've seen, like as a child gets older and older, parents continue like the philosophy of it's just easier and more peaceful if I do it for them. And this can be anything like getting dressed, doing their laundry, chores around the house, making their own lunches. And it's going to like impact the person in a few different ways. It doesn't like give them the opportunity to develop their competencies. And then it also just like doesn't help them develop any resilience. So for example, like I had a client who was 20 years old, and I found out like his parents were dressing him every day in something that I knew he's capable of. So I had the parents transfer the responsibility to him. And it was so interesting because when the dad did, the individual said, so basically he's like handing him his shirt to put on for the first time. And the child goes, kind of yells at him like, you do it. And when asked, I want you to do it. And he responds, it's too hard. Like, or why he didn't want to do it, because it's too hard. And in this moment, I just kind of had this like discovery, like a light bulb moment of, if getting dressed for this person was too hard, everything else that followed in the day where an expectation was going to be set, it was going to be even harder. And a quick disclaimer would be like, maybe this isn't the case for all families. Like if a child has apraxia or other limitations, maybe this isn't the right level of challenge. I think that's really important. I'll probably come back and touch on that a little bit more. But for this particular case, I knew it was a challenge the person could do for themselves with guided support. So the message I share with like all families that I support with like of all ages, because you can start young too. This doesn't have to be just a teenager and young adult thing. I ask like, where are you compensating for the child, and what responsibilities would you like your child to do for themselves? For many, it's like a really great, like empowering moment to like start thinking about, okay, like we're in a comfortable place and we have that like safe, trusting, guiding relationships. We can now start transferring these responsibilities. And something I'll share with parents that I work with, and it's probably gonna be good to hear for listeners, is like currently maybe they're spending like, let's say if they're like helping them get dressed, like they're spending 2 to 5 minutes every single day helping them get dressed, and transferring that responsibility at first is probably going to be somewhere in like the 5 to 15, depending on the person, maybe even 20 minutes of time being spent. Yeah. But over time, that's going to become non-existent. So a lot of times like that, it's just easier for me to do it. It's like, well, that's going to be forever. So it's this change from like how would I want to like phrase it? Like a short term, like a low long-term investment versus like a high longer term investment. But over time, I don't think I explained it right, but it yields dividends over time where, hopefully in the future, you're not doing that anymore. You're now free to go either work on new skills or even have time for yourself.
Totally. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, even just in the morning for families to have that time for themselves, even just a few minutes to take a deep breath and get the day started without having to be there all the time makes a big difference. It really does have a lasting impact. So yeah. I love that. I'm so glad you shared that. And I think it's incredibly powerful, right? We get to see these clients then over time develop so many skills and so many abilities and be more independent. And that just feels good.
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com. So, and I know you mentioned earlier about your client about packing the suitcase, and I'd love for you to share that story, what that looked like for that client and that how significant that was.
Yeah, I love this story of the individual I supported and the suitcase, because it just really touches on all the things that a lot of things that we've talked about up to this point, about like giving him opportunities, figuring out what's meaningful for him. And so just to give the listeners like a little bit of background, basically, I was working with this family and their assignment was to transfer responsibilities, in the area they identified was, or the child identified was, I want to learn to pack my own suitcase. And so I'm watching the video recording and I was just blown away, because as I'm watching it, I'm watching this individual smiling and feeling competent. And to myself, I was thinking like, I can't believe this. For me, it's like such a mundane task. Like, I think we've all had to pack before, especially like, I don't know, for me, it can feel like really stressful or overwhelming, especially if it's like for like a really big trip and you're like maybe trying to pack for a week in Europe and trying to figure out what you're going to wear. But for this individual, he was just so excited to be like, and happy to be doing something he never thought he like would be able to do, but always wanted to. So for me, a lot of my work is trying to unlock moments like this, which are just like so cool to see. And it snowballs into like the individual beginning to not only think, but like recognize other things that they can do for themselves. And I have another story I could share related to that if you'd like to hear another one. So just,
sure. I love the story.
Yeah, the story is great. You know, similarly, I still work with them. A really great nonverbal client. And when we first started working together, he was allowed to stem pretty much all day because he's like highly dysregulated. But what a lot of parents don't recognize is like allowing him to stem, or even like it could relate to like having too much screen time, like kind of further promotes dysregulation. And so like, again, it's like, it's important. Like, first I want to start by just saying like, it's important, like maybe this is the right level of challenge for some families, especially if they've like adopted like a low demand parenting approach. This can be the right expectation, but there has to come a time for growth when you give the child like a competent role and opportunities for being independent, which I've seen like become like highly successful. Like, I mean, just like the suitcase example. And so for example, like for this adult who's allowed to stem every single day, I started working with him and expected him to complete various tasks, and I'd go over to work with him and model different things. Like, for example, we just did laundry together, and no matter what we're doing, when there's like a clear role for the child to have and a co-regulation pattern, like I hand him the shirt and he places it in the washer, this individual is like the most focused and regulated in his day. So I've learned to like, and shared this with like parents, where we're actually like helping this person more by promoting their engagement. Not only we're building their competencies, of course, and like supporting their independence, which is like really meaningful for the individual. Like this guy doing his laundry and other tasks around the house is just like lit up in what he's capable of doing and pushing himself to do. But we're also just supporting their focus, their regulation through co-regulation.
Yeah, it's huge. And I'm so glad you mentioned co-regulation and the power of that. And that's a huge part of how we set them up for success, to understand their role. But I love that example. And now I wanted to talk about, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but just the idea of them kind of being lit up and excited, and kind of how powerful that is when you see that really meaningful excitement in your clients. So let's talk a little bit about like, what does that do for them when you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the core of it, it really just shifts them into being like growth seeking. We're all about like encouraging like a growth seeking mindset. And so like things that I notice is like, I see more confidence. So like for me, what I observe is like they drop their shoulders back a little bit, they perk up, their chest is out, their eyes open up, and they just seem they feel more competent and confident, and they really just start pushing themselves towards other opportunities of growth. What's really cool is what this can over time really accomplish. Like an advanced case that I was working on and still working with is I was working with this like highly anxious adult in social situations that was really like impacting his mental health. But by like first helping him like focus on like what his interests were, like taking a trip abroad, living in the dorms, helping him with skills like navigating a laundromat, attending church. And now he's like finally gotten a job. So just like his growth has snowballed into this incredibly meaningful life that he's now living, where 3 years ago, prior to getting a lot of these opportunities, it was hard for him to leave the house and things like that. And I have a lot of stories like that where it's just been so great to see these young adults really getting these opportunities and just how it's enhanced what they're doing in their life and what they're capable of.
Yeah, I think that's so significant. And it's not an uncommon story to hear of these teens and adults not feeling comfortable leaving their house and even just staying in their rooms. We've had clients that they won't even leave their bedroom. And to see that outcome that you just described is life-changing. So it's incredible.
And I think, I know I've touched on this a little bit. It's all about finding like the right next level of challenge. It's really important. I think we'll come back and touch on that some more. But just to share for listeners, sometimes it's not going to be as successful as like, he's going to go and get a job in 3 years. With one person I've been working with for 3 years, it was like, we started just by going to the community pool for like 15, 30 minutes and going and sitting in the hot tub. And this was a guy who likes to sit on his computer, pretty much never left his house. And so, just a really simple opportunity to go out in the community. It was meaningful for him, meaningful for his family. And there's so much that can still be worked on in those simple opportunities too. Like it's now expanded to a lot more. Like we go bowling, we've been to Dave and Buster's, just we go all over the place now. But starting small, help the individual feel comfortable, and then we slowly expand from there.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about that a little bit too on, this idea of how do you support families to know kind of the right level of support, as they're kind of reducing their compensations, and when sometimes we pull away too fast. And as much as we sometimes overcompensate, sometimes we pull that support too fast. And so let's talk about how you help families navigate that process.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my mantras in life is just like everything's this delicate balancing act or dance, because it's really important to identify like what we've been talking about, the right level of challenge to where success can occur without it being too overwhelming that leads to failure. So in RDI, like for parents, like trying to identify the right level of challenge, we call it going to the edge +1. And so that is like, what is the child capable of doing right now? And then what would be the next step? And sometimes for me, I go from like, okay, edge +10, and then we build backwards. What's the edge +1 from there? So if the skill I'm trying to work on is community integration, the edge +1 was just going to the community pool, and it might not even be getting in. Like we might be starting so small that let's just go and look at it. For some, it could be like, let's maybe even just like pull up on Google Images what it looks like so they can get familiar with what the environment's going to be like. If like maybe it's like checking out a new restaurant or something like that. Yeah. And so for instance, like another example, like I'm also working with like an adult who's dreaming to live like independently. And so I was kind of using this as an example when we use like the ARC self-determination scale, but we just started with, okay, let's break down each task, or let's kind of go over like all you need for independent living. Like you have to cook, clean, have a calendar, show up on time to work, things like that. Okay, let's break this. Then we break it down into like separate categories and individual tasks. So one of the major things we worked on was just making one meal for lunch. Thankfully, he eats a sandwich mostly every day. So it's like once we could work on that one skill, it he could do it throughout the week. And on the flip side, it's really important for parents to recognize when there's a breakdown. I think sometimes with older kids, they're like, well, he's 18 now and he should be able to do that for himself. And that could be a realistic expectation, but there's a lot there where you got to be able to recognize if there's a breakdown occurring, why it's happening, and how you can go in and repair it. I remember this one family, the child was moving kind of into like an independent studio off to the side of the house, and they had moved completely into this new, bigger house. And his TV was sitting in the living room for like 2 weeks. And so I was like, oh, the TV's still here, like to the mom. And he's like, yeah, I'm waiting for him to move it or ask for help, or just to move it into his room and ask for help. And I was like, well, I wonder if there's a breakdown occurring because this has been 2 weeks now. And so we went and talked with him, and it's been so long, I forget the specifics of it, but we were able to figure out what the breakdown was, that like, he was like, well, I can't pick it up myself, but didn't know how to go and ask for help from his mom. And so
Yeah.
it's great to have expectations, but it's really important to be realistic with them and not just remove all support, because failure can kind of bleed into like learned helplessness, and it just doesn't feel good, where success really motivates a person. And so if we can help individuals be successful, it really just builds on that motivation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, that's so true. And I think that ebb and flow, kind of making adjustments in the moment, is so important, and reflecting and realizing, oh, what's happening here? Let's see, maybe we need to make an adjustment. Maybe the child or the individual needs a little bit more support. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about that competency. And I know that you also support families that have kind of life coaches or other team members. And I think that's so important too, and how we support those other teens and our team members. And let's talk about how you support those other kinds of, I know you've had fitness instructors or respite workers or different kinds of individuals that work with your clients and have worked with them as well. So what does that look like?
Yeah, for me, that can be really fun, to be honest with you, especially as time goes on. I would say some of like the biggest things is like initially it's going to like kind of look similar to what I do in RDI, where I work with parents and we just teach different concepts like shifting your communication, setting up interactions that promote success, things of that nature. So I kind of like transfer over this knowledge. But then it gets really fun after that, because we can kind of collaborate on what our goals are and figure out how to just like implement them into whatever it might be. It might be like what we're working on. So for like respite workers, I feel like I've done that the most. And that's been like primarily like the way I've supported other team members. And so what's really cool is just seeing their growth over time when they're given a little bit of guidance, because they start to become these like super experts of supporting this child, because they're now seeing them just as often as like mom or dad. And so they're just becoming really successful at like taking them out in the community, giving them opportunities at the home. And then with job coaches and fitness instructors, yeah, again, really kind of going back to like some of the foundational concepts of like building that relationship, shifting their communication so it's less demand heavy, and yeah, just really building a rich relationship with the person that they're working with, and then as a team as well.
Absolutely. I love that. And I know another thing that you really value is helping to widen the support network for that individual, especially as teens and adults. And let's chat about that. Why is that important to you, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it's really important to me, because I mean, even before we get to like vocational coaches, fitness instructors, respite workers, some of the individuals that I work with outside of mom and dad are not having any interactions with others. One of the individuals I worked with, I was the first person he was going to be working with outside of mom and dad, I think like in like 3 or 4 years. And they were really hesitant on how that was going to go. And so thankfully, since I think I'm okay at it, I was able to establish a relationship with them, connect, and build that comfortableness, which has now expanded to, okay, he can be comfortable with a guide outside of mom and dad. That's going to be paramount, because as a person gets older, there are just going to be other people they're going to have to start working with, whether it's like a vocation coach, all the things that we've already listed. I don't need to go back through them, but it just kind of it opens the door for that transference of guidance from mom and dad to me and now to other people. So it like kind of creates this bridge that can be really helpful.
For sure. Yeah. And I love that's something that you really encourage and create the space for it to be successful with your clients. And you show them that it can be. Some parents can have concerns after seeing their child not be successful or withdraw. And it's amazing to see it on the other end once you really build that meaningful relationship, what can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know you've touched a little bit today on kind of a growth mindset, growth seeking, and resiliency, and that competence, real world competence. How do these qualities how do these qualities, why are these qualities so important more than just isolated skills? And how do you see them set someone up for long-term success?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes like we get so focused, therapies and parents and professionals can get so focused on skills that I think of like almost like we're plugging holes in a faulty dam rather than trying to reinforce the dam, which by encouraging like a growth mindset, resiliency, and real world competencies, you're like kind of helping to reinforce core characteristics that are going to be like transferable and generalizable to all areas of their life. If you focus on growth mindset, resiliency, and real world competencies, it's like to even like provide an example, like child had a job interview and at the end of it, I was like, how'd it go? And he's like, great. I made really good eye contact. And I was like, oh, there's so much more to that than just that one skill. And I know that does maybe, I think that applies to real world competence, but kind of going back to the original question, it's for the growth mindset, it's really supporting the child in like seeking out challenges, because that really makes our world meaningful. I feel like a lot of the most meaning comes from like points in our lives where we took on a big challenge and we overcame it, and we're now in a better place because of it. And so I want to support individuals getting the same mindset. But in order to achieve that, you're going to need thick skin and resiliency. So sometimes you got to really start small with like implementing like small challenges in day to day that the person can handle and get used to handling, and recognizing like developing that episodic memory, positive episodic memory that like, oh, I can handle challenges and be successful and problem solve and get through this. And I think all that's like really needed just to be successful in the world. Things change that we have to adapt to and adjust to. Challenges come up that are unexpected that we have to navigate and overcome. So you got to really implement kind of these more like mindsets versus just like any particular skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so well said. It's so true and incredibly powerful for long-term success. And I can imagine some of these families that are listening might be thinking, if I stop helping my child, everything's going to fall apart. They're going to withdraw. They're not going to do the skills, all these concerns. What reassurance or perspective would you offer them today?
Yeah. Well, I think first, I don't know if this is reassurance, but and I don't like having to remind families of this, but there is going to be a day where they're not going to be able to help. It's likely that parents are going to outlive their child. So I'm not saying stop helping, but we need to start scaffolding our support so the child's taking on more responsibility for themselves. And so it's making that more like heavy investment now in just scaffolding support so the child can be more and more competent and capable. So I don't know if that's reassurance to that specific statement, like if they stop helping, everything will fall apart. It's more just a statement like there is going to be a time where you won't be able to help. And so it's really important to start setting up your support where you're reducing the help that you're providing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what's so significant from your perspective too, is that you believe it's possible. You believe that you've seen it time and time again.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And I think that this is actually helpful. I'm glad I thought of this. For people listening, try to get more support. Look into self-determination. I work with a team. It's been so cool. And I should touch on this earlier, but I work with a team and they now have like 3 or 4 respite workers working with this child. And it's been so beneficial in a million different ways. And whether it's self-determination or not, just looking for that support, because now the child's getting so many more opportunities. His growth is exponentially growing because he's working with such an amazing team. And the mom's now able to step back a little bit and have a little bit of a break and still be involved, but been able to transfer that responsibility to other people, which is also going to touch on like something we talked about earlier, where now this child's getting comfortable with other people in his life, which he's going to have to rely on at some point, other people than mom or dad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So true. It's so true. And it's amazing that it can be done and it can be very successful, that format. And
and
so
maybe one last thing too is like, in other support areas, look into RDI. I think what we're really great about at our jobs is helping parents develop and refine their skills so they feel more capable of supporting their child, which I think takes off a lot of pressure, because I think a lot of that feeling of like, if I stop helping, everything's going to fall apart, kind of leads into like, just families just feel like they're constantly putting out a fire. And I think programs like RDI can help ground parents, help them navigate the obstacles. So it just feels more manageable, while also more targeted and achieving like really meaningful change and progress in their child's development.
Yeah, absolutely. And RDI, for those that have not heard of RDI, it's relationship development intervention. And we'll certainly share where people can find out more information about that as well. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's incredibly powerful and supportive to the whole family system. And if there was one last message of hope that you would like to share for those that are listening who might be feeling discouraged or unsure of how to help their adult son or daughter with autism, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the biggest message of hope is just letting them know that they're not alone. There's a lot of families going through similar experiences, and there's a lot of support out there. I think it can be really tough for families to navigate these obstacles. And I think what's really unfortunate is they do feel like I'm the only one who can solve this problem. And I feel like across the board, there's a lot of families sharing similar, kind of having similar experiences and the challenges that they're facing. And so I know like I know this isn't like for right now, but one of my missions is to create a network of support for families. I mean, there are obviously some already existing, like the Autism Society of San Diego for here in San Diego, but I think that's national. So just trying to find like resources, try to find support, and just recognizing that you're not alone. And in addition to that, I think it's like really easy for parents to be like, oh my gosh, my child's 18 right now, and he's still lacking executive functioning skills and self-awareness. And so what I love about this stage of like 18 to 30 is like the best stage of brain development, where the child starts developing the executive functioning skills, self-awareness, and things like that. And so I think it's the prefrontal cortex, and then it develops up until like 26, but it's delayed for if the child also is diagnosed with ADHD about 3 years. So it's now pushed back to about 30. And so if your child's like 18, 20, 22, and you're like, oh, he's still lacking in these skills, it's not too late to start working on it. A lot of things start churning on at just different developmental milestones. And so continue to focus and continue to work on it, and just don't think it's like never going to happen. And then one last thing I'll share is just because so many families will say like, oh, well, I wish I had gotten support through RDI, or like, because I also did do some life coaching for all that, specifically through RDI. Like, I wish we'd gotten support for this for our child when they were 6, 7, 8. Like, it would have been so helpful. And yeah, it could have been beneficial. It could have guided you in that process, but it's never too late. Like, for the family who specifically said that, like, we're now about to hit our last contract, meaning that they've completed 4 years, for listeners who don't know RDI. And the relationship the mom's built with both her kids is just amazing. Like, they're talking about their interests and hobbies and supporting one another and talking about church and their faith in God. And it's just like so cool to see how it's blossomed over the last 3 to 4 years. And so hopefully all of those do provide like maybe some things for parents to look into that can give them some optimism and hope moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way to end, and incredible. And I just love your enthusiasm and excitement around supporting the adults and the teens, and that you just have so much energy to give to your clients and excitement. And I'm so grateful that you were on today, Stephen, and we're able to share this amazing information and your passion, and it really shines through when you're talking about it. And so I'd love for you to share how people can find you.
Yeah, well, this has been fun. Thanks for having me on. To find me, the best way is email. I will say I have an Instagram that's called the SoCal Social. It's SoCal Social. It's still in the works, but what I guess this would be good to share on the podcast. Something that we're working on at TAG is eventually starting like a older teen, young adult social club, because I think just helping adults and individuals build community and make relationships and just go have fun is so important. Just will provide like a lot of richness to their life. So it's something that's still in the works. But if people were interested, by giving me a follow, there's nothing on the Instagram page. It will definitely give me your contact information. We have a website too that we can link in the podcast. And if we can get some interest, like I'm really trying to get that going. It's just been, there's so much always going on, but I'd really like to get that going. And if people start following, it would tell me they're interested, I could reach out, and that'd be a good way to connect to. And I can start checking it and responding if people ever have questions or just want some support.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And that's going to be SoCal Social, that group. Great. And so we'll make sure to put the website for that page in the show notes for our listeners as well. And we will definitely be getting that group going. So if anybody's interested in signing up, want to learn more, talk to Stephen about what it's all about, he's happy to share. And it's going to be a great opportunity for our teens and adults in Southern California to get together and have fun and enjoy each other and have meaningful opportunity. So fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. This was awesome. And so loved having our conversation today. And I hope to maybe have you on again in the future. So once we get that group going, we'll talk more about it.
Great. Let's do it. That'd be great.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back, babe. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll leave echoes in every place I fly. I break the mold with the rebels line. I'm a hurricane of free, rolling mine.
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.